Everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. Want to talk about a city that we've talked about a lot before, and a country, Syria, Aleppo in Syria. The major battles going on there, and there's a big battle to decide the fate of Assad, this sort of thing, but it's been going on for a long time. American troops are involved, directly and indirectly, and of course the Russian troops are there, and a lot of other factions and jihadists and independents, and many countries are involved. But there's a recent article on Zero Hedge, it came out today, that talks a little bit about that, which is significant. And we have implied quite frequently and complained that the enemy frequently ends up with our weapons. And we assume this be the case, but we don't have absolute proof. But this article today gives more evidence to the point that not only is it true that they're ending up with our weapons, but it's not an accident. It is not like we sent it to, the moderates, and the moderates screw up and then they end up in the hands of the radical. So the title of this tells you a little bit about where we're coming from and where Zero Hedge is coming from. It says, quote, America is on our side. And that is said by al-Nusra commander tells German press U.S. is arming the jihadists. I mean, this is a blatant statement, and they present some evidence to this. And it's rather disgusting in many ways that we end up in these situations, that American taxpayers' money is used for this in a war that should never be fought and is illegal. We shouldn't be there. And yet I think that to dispose of this and dismiss it and say, no, this is over the top. Where do you think this is going? I mean, this is going to continue. This not like this is the first time our government has ever done this. We've done it before. So I think this is serious in the sense that it won't change the battle tomorrow, but it's serious in the sense that this is information American people ought to have, and maybe they would wake up and say, enough is enough. What are we doing over there in the first place?
Yeah, but unfortunately, our mainstream media is as bad or probably worse than the Soviet media ever was. And so most people will never hear this type of thing. They'll never hear that this is happening because the news that they're getting is that Assad woke up one morning and decided to start bombing the people of eastern Aleppo just because he enjoys doing it. The media doesn't report that that part of Aleppo has been occupied by Al Qaeda, which is called Al-Nusra Front in Syria, for the past several years, and these people are living under siege. They don't report it that way. This is not to say that Assad is an angel, but he is facing an armed insurgency in his country. And I always find it funny that the Americans think it's so horrible and shocking that he's fighting back. Can you imagine if Al Qaeda took over L.A. or half of L.A.? Do you think Obama would say, well, I better not try to take that back?
Don't mess around with it. I want to read one short paragraph in this article because it deals with, the transfer of weapons, and have you comment on this. It says, but the most stunning admission came when asked if the TOW missiles were initially intended for al-Nusra or if the group obtained them from the moderate Free Syrian Army, a group we would be supportive of. The jihadists clarified, and this is the guy that's in charge, a major person in al-Nusra. He says, quote, no, the missiles were given to us directly. So there was no hedging on this. And, of course, this doesn't give us the proof, but it's been lingering out there. A lot of people believe it no matter how much Hillary dismisses this and says, oh, that's impossible. We wouldn't be doing that. Of course, it probably started with her, but it continues.
Yeah, and this speaks to something that we've suspected for a while, which is that these mythical moderates really don't exist. They're rainbow unicorns out there somewhere. And the reality is that the people that are fighting effectively against Assad are Al Qaeda. And so I think that explains why the U.S. has refused from the first ceasefire in February until now even, they've refused to simply tell the moderates, stop fighting with Al Qaeda, stop fighting alongside Al Qaeda, or you'll be bombed. The U.S. says, no, we need more time to separate them. But I would think a great motivation to separate them is to say, we are going to bomb Al Qaeda. If you continue to fight with him, you'll be bombed too. I would think they would separate voluntarily pretty quickly.
Well, of course, that's a tactical maneuver and may be beneficial and better advice. But, of course, my goal in life is try to prevent these situations and keeping us out of them. But this points out the total contradiction. And that, to me, is a consequence of a pragmatic, utilitarian approach to almost everything we do in this country, rather than based on a principle of self-determination and national defense and this sort of thing. But it comes along, well, what do we do here and how do we handle this, give weapons? But this was something that they went through more secretive than we know about this, and that was dealing with Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They were, helping. Brzezinski was involved in that, and he was very proud of the fact that they did work closely with the Taliban at the time, I think, and he says we're successful. We brought the Soviets to their knees. Of course, what brought the Soviets to their knees is that they had an absolutely unworkable economic policy of total socialism, and that's what brought them to their knees. They weren't brought to their knees for military reasons.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was going to say, people would say, oh, Ron, you've gone off the rails. You're in a conspiracy theory. The U.S. would never be alongside Al Qaeda. But you're right. After the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the U.S. did develop a plan under Brzezinski and others to help bin Laden and those that later became Al Qaeda, to use them to overthrow the Soviets ultimately in Afghanistan. So there is a precedent of the U.S. working with Al Qaeda, the Afghan affiliate, and now this fellow who's in charge of Al Qaeda in Aleppo says the U.S. is working with the Syrian affiliate of Al Qaeda.
You talked a minute ago about the inconsistency, and we should be more deliberate. Who are our enemies and what do we do? And come up with a policy that, even under these circumstances, make more sense. And this other quote from the same article would support your position. We do not, this is Al Nusra, we do not recognize the ceasefire. Well, that's a big surprise. Both sides probably really did. And he says the idea of a transitional government, this is Al Nusra guy, in Syria is also not supported by Al Nusra. The commander said, quote, we accept no one from the Assad regime or the Free Syrian Army, our ally, which is described as moderate. Our goal is to overthrow the regime, and that is it, and establish an Islamic state in accordance with the Islamic Sharia. So that is emphatic, and yet we're in bed together with these people. It's just so tragic because this is a mess. It's probably something that might have caused a civil war for all we know, but it wouldn't be this way if we didn't have how many outside countries involved. How many outside countries were literally involved before 2011 when we declared Assad had to go? We probably don't have much evidence of being, very much involved before that.
Yeah, not much. But now, according to this commander, they're getting tanks and heavy weaponry from via Libya and Turkey into Syria. They're also, this is interesting, he claims they're getting officers and experts from the U.S., Israel, and Turkey that are helping Al Qaeda out in Syria. And you might say at first, well, that sounds crazy. Why would Israel help these radical Islamists? But Israel views this as a tactical alliance with radical Sunnis, because they view the biggest threat to be Hezbollah and the Iranians. So they're making a deal with someone they may consider the devil to defeat a bigger devil. But what happens when you do that is you still get a devil.
I'm sure the military-industrial complex doesn't complain about this, but it would be hard for me to believe that the military-industrial complex has the literal control of the foreign policy. I think the foreign policy just sort of blends in, and they're delighted with it because who's going to make all the weapons for both sides? I'm sure Assad somewhere along the way ended up with some of our weapons.
Yeah.
We weren't always arch enemies, but it looks to me like the chaos is going to be there, and it has to be resolved at Aleppo. That's a big deal. I mean, if Al Nusra is routed there, I would think that might change the whole nature of what's going on over there.
That'll change the course.
But it might increase the options of the other countries too. They may increase activity rather than say, "Oh, I guess we're losing."
And Russia's not about to back off. So if Aleppo falls to Assad and Al Qaeda is defeated in Aleppo, will the U.S. risk a nuclear war with Russia over it? Is a question. But here's something else that stuck out. And sorry to bring this up, but this stuck out of the interview with me too, because if you remember, just a few days ago, this humanitarian aid convoy was hit with something, a missile or something, and blown up or what have you. And of course, the U.S. immediately said Russia did it. Then they said Syria did it. Then they said, well, Russia knew where it was, so they're responsible. It was a sort of a propaganda ploy. But here's what the Nusra guy said: Nusra will not allow aid trucks into Aleppo. He was emphatic, and so it makes you wonder if they were not the ones who blew it up. You know, they would have an advantage by doing it.
And these are the same people getting our weapons?
Yeah.
So,
they may have used it to blow this up.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible stuff.
Well, it looks to me like it's going to last a while longer, and I don't know what we should expect, but I think it's not enhancing the liberties of the American people. It's not helping the American budget. It's helping the profits of the war profiteers, even though, as I mentioned, I don't believe they design literally the foreign policy of what's going on over there, because there are so many countries involved. So this is going to continue. The reason why I think this is an important article, it talks about the nature of the people involved. You know, most people, like you said, don't even know what's going on. The American people aren't well informed on this. But then if they are, it's hard to keep up with the players. Who's here and whose side are you on? And what do you mean? They're our enemies and we're giving them their weapons? And what about the Russians? I think that's the big problem is what kind of an explosion could occur between Russian forces and the United States, and that would be a big deal. Although we don't have boots on the ground, we have plenty of an investment over there with weapons and special forces and CIA and who knows what else is involved.
And if this is not an argument for non-interventionism, I don't know what is.
No, there's no doubt about it that a total non-interventionist foreign policy would have prevented this from happening in many ways. At least it would have prevented us from subsidizing and giving weapons to our so-called enemies. That doesn't mean there would be peace and tranquility in Syria. But the Middle East, in our efforts to remake the Middle East, which we have participated in for nearly 100 years, has not worked very well. It's been a total failure. So it's time for the American people to wake up, realize what's going on, don't subsidize both sides, don't subsidize the war profiteers, and have a foreign policy that is designed for the protection of the American people and protection of our liberties and not designed to run an empire. It's time to end the empire and bring our troops home. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.